How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. In today's video, we've got 3 topics to cover, starting out with even more handheld news. This thing is so real and I cannot wait to talk about it, but there's one major problem that Sony hopefully will solve. Second on the list, Sony woke up and decided it was finally time to start making more money on their games. I know, shocking. And then third on the list, I want to talk about the absolute disaster that is MINDSEYE and give you a little PSA at the very end. So yeah, let's jump into the first news story here, which is about the PlayStation handheld. So this thing is leaking like crazy. Sony cannot resist the temptation to make a new handheld. When they see Xbox working with Asus, when they see Valve making a Steam Deck and hopefully a Steam Deck 2, Nintendo Switch absolutely cleaning up with the Switch 2, it makes too much sense to make a handheld to not do it. And everything seems like it's lining up absolutely perfectly for this thing. They're working with AMD on FSR 4 to make it work like PSSR, which will also improve PSSR across the board. And that's great for a handheld because, you know, you're going to have to use some upscaler tech to actually get these games running appropriately on a handheld. I love all these videos of people showing games like Cyberpunk on the Switch 2 or even Metroid Prime 4. And they're like, look, this thing's native 1080p, or look, this thing's native 4K. And it's like, oh, my sweet summer child, you have not been around with real gamers playing on PlayStation 5s or Xbox Series X's or PCs like the Steam Deck for a while. You don't understand that these games are not natively running at anywhere close to 1080p. At the very most, they're running at like 560p and upscaling from there. So obviously the Switch 2 is much better played in handheld mode because the jump from 560p up to 1080p looks a lot nicer than the jump from like 720p up to 1440p. As we all know, playing games in this generation, they are running at some dismal base resolutions and then upscaling from there. That's why Sony invested so much money into PSSR to make it look and run really well compared to FSR, because up until hopefully FSR 4, things have not been great by any stretch of the word. We have seen some blocky textures, some fuzzy hair, and some just overall poor frame rates for how low the internal resolutions are in a lot of these games. And it's not Sony's fault, it's not Nintendo's fault, it's not Microsoft's fault, it's the fault of these engines being blown out of proportion that everyone is using, like Unreal 5. They are made for hardware that does not exist yet. They are made for hardware that's going to like make movie effects or whatever. And clearly, I mean, we're trying to buy consoles for $500, not 15 grand. So we have to play on these engines that are far outstripping the hardware they're actually being used for. So, you know, upscaling is good. It just sucks that we're in a situation that we need it. The other leaking rumor that we've talked about recently that really just shows Sony is working on a handheld is that they're testing a low power mode on the PlayStation 5 and Pro, where if you're playing a PS4 game like Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3, and you've got way more overhead on these consoles than you actually need to play these old gen games, even at 60 FPS and higher settings than what you saw on the PS4. They're testing a new feature on the PlayStation 5 and Pro where it'll go into low power mode, it'll draw less power from your wall, and that's good for your energy bill. But the real reason is they want to see if this hardware, these chips that they have in the consoles, are still performative on older games or even PS5 games, even at lower clock speeds. And why would they want to do that? Well, you could take the PS5 chip and plop it in a handheld right now, but if you want to run it at full spec, that thing's probably going to be about 6 to 8 inches thick because of the battery you'd need, right? Like, it's just simple math. You do the watt hours of the battery versus the TDP that the chip is running at, and you can figure out exactly how long the battery is going to last if it's running at full TDP. So you invent a low power mode where you still get good performance at lower TDPs, and that gives you more battery life at the end of the day. The Steam Deck OLED has this figured out. You can get up to like 7 or 8 hours of battery life in games like Dead Cells when you're using a lower TDP. The Switch 2 is decent, I would say, but the maximum you're going to see is like 3 to 4 hours because even though it's running at a pretty low spec, the battery is pretty small, right? Like, it's a thin device. You're only going to get like 2 or 3 hours at most out of the Nintendo Switch 2, but thankfully this is something that can improve over time, like what we're seeing on the PS5 and Pro. So yeah, they're going for a low powered PS5, which means the bread and butter for this handheld is going to be 30 FPS PS5 games using PSSR or hopefully FSR 4, or if you're playing older games like from the PS4 era, 40 FPS is probably going to be the sweet spot, but you could definitely see some 60 FPS titles. So everything is really good in that camp. But there is one problem that handhelds as a whole have, and that's that they're always going to be a generation behind. Like when the Steam Deck came out, it was running PS5 games okay, like not amazing. You had to lower the settings a lot to get even 30 FPS out of these games, and you had to run FSR in performance mode. But if you were playing PS4 games like God of War 2018, you could run those at PS4 equivalent settings and get a rock solid 30 or even 40 FPS, and that's clearly what Sony's going for in the future. They want it to natively play PS5 games, PS4 games, hopefully PS3 games, PS2, PS1, and PSP games. All of those, it'll run laps around those games because it's going to be future hardware. Like, it's going to line up with the PS5 generation in the same way that the Steam Deck lined up with the PS4 generation. And then they're probably hoping that for PS6 games, you'll use the PS Portal tech and stream them from your console. But how awesome would it be if they could get some breakthrough tech going on where they could actually run PS6 games natively without sacrificing graphical quality to get decent performance at a level of like 30 FPS. Obviously, this is a really tough ask. I mean, if Valve can't do it with PC tech, it's going to be pretty tough for Sony to do it. I'm sure it's possible. Like, you can buy Ioneo handhelds that run desktop chips. They're of course very thick and have huge batteries in them, but if it's Sony making it, they're not going to do that. They're going to want relatively thin hardware that looks like mass consumer ready, right? It's not like desktop PC level because it's got to be made to be sold at a scale of like tens to hundreds of millions of people. But with all the gains that we've seen in FSR and everything like that and other upscaler tech, I could totally see a future where, you know, they have a mid-gen refresh of the PlayStation Portable. Like, they do a version that's a little bit stronger a couple years in, kind of like how the ROG Ally does it. The ROG Ally came out with the Z1 Extreme, looked and ran pretty decent. It's a little bit better than the Steam Deck. And then a little over a year later, they introduced the Ally X that addressed a lot of the concerns, like frying your SD cards, because that was a huge problem with the launch ROG Ally. It also became slightly more ergonomic. It had better battery life and slightly better performance. And then now we're getting the Xbox Ally, which is going to use the Z2 Extreme chip, which is pretty decent. It's going to be able to push 1080p, but I'm hoping whatever we get from Sony is even better. I think Sony is just weirdly primed to finally have a handheld that can perform in the space of console gaming, where, you know, you're going to be able to play your PlayStation 5 games on the go and get good performance and transfer your saves and play the same game you bought on your PlayStation 5. And ultimately, they're going to want to do that because that's what keeps people engaged, core metric engagement, in the PlayStation ecosystem. But man, if they could solve that one major problem of not being a generation behind, it would really be the best handheld ever. I don't know if they can do it, but if they really want to be impressive out of the gate, that's exactly what they should be working towards. But speaking of Sony making smart moves, let's talk about how they woke up and decided to start making money again. So we're going back over a year when Helldivers 2 came out on PC and PlayStation 5, and they tried to introduce PlayStation Network as a mandatory login on Steam. Now that didn't go very well. I see the thinking that they had where they said, well, Xbox makes people log into the Xbox network when they play games on Steam, even though you like get no material benefit from it. You can get achievements, you can see your friends list, you can do a couple other things, but all the core things people want, like save transferring with their Xbox console, even though you're logging in to your Xbox network name, that is not available in stuff like Starfield or Forza Horizon 5. And they're like, well, it seems to be working just fine for them, so we could do it with our stuff and no one will really care. The problem is they were met with a pretty hard brick wall. People did care because, you know, you already have a Steam account, you bought the game through Steam, why should you have to log into the PlayStation Network? So with Helldivers 2, because the game had already been for sale for a while, they relented, but with games like God of War Ragnarok and Ghost of Tsushima, it is mandatory to log into the PlayStation Network, and they've been relentless about taking down mods that remove that functionality because ironically it's pretty easy. And really the only reason they relented with Helldivers 2 is because they did it after the game was for sale for a few months and there were a lot of countries that didn't have the PlayStation Network. So if you added in forced PlayStation Network login, those countries would not be able to play the game and they had already sold it. So that would be a PR class action lawsuit disaster. So with games like Ghost of Tsushima, with games like God of War Ragnarok, with games like The Last of Us Part 2, when they have the forced Sony Network login, you can't sell those games in those countries. And somehow they've figured it out where they've either added the PlayStation Network to those countries or they make it so if you buy the game in those countries, you don't have the forced login. Either way, this is just a stupid thing. Like if they had save transferring, I'd be more sympathetic to the entire thing as a whole, and I'd be more happy to buy these games twice if I didn't have to completely start over my save for literally no reason, when clearly you could do save transferring very easily with this PlayStation Network login. But they've been missing out on sales in these countries for over a year. So I'm glad they woke up and realized they were just leaving money on the table for literally no reason. I get that the reasoning behind having the PlayStation Network login is A, Microsoft did it first and they were doing fine with it, but B, if you have the network login, you can count those people who buy the game on Steam and log into the PSN as PSN users, and that looks good to shareholders. But clearly it's so anti-consumer friendly that it's not worth it, as they've seen proven to them by people refunding games and not buying them. So it's nice to see that these other people in other countries are supported, but I'd just like to see the functionality either work as intended, aka transferring your saves from PS5 to PC, or not be there at all. But hopefully that happens. I don't foresee it happening in the near future, so I'm glad everything works as it should at the level that they're working at. But speaking of games being a disaster, let's talk about MINDSEYE. So this game has never shown well. It was shown off in a state of play, and I was like, this game looks rough. They really hammered home that it was from Leslie Benzies, the guy who was the producer of a lot of the big GTA games. It looked like a spiritual successor to GTA. It had cool open world car chase, gunplay type scenarios, and it seemed like it could be decent, if not a little bit rough. But now the game is out and it's a complete disaster. You know, there's people playing it. It's literally falling apart. I've seen that if you get to a point of the map that has water, you literally just walk across the water. The NPC interactions are terrible. The frame rate sucks. It stutters like crazy. There's apparently game-breaking missions. And let's just be real. It's looking like a Cyberpunk 2077 on Xbox One and PS4 style situation, but this is on next-gen consoles like the PlayStation 5. It's getting absolutely eviscerated in reviews. Of course, on Twitter, there's people saying, oh, I'm not having any problems with it. And it's like, you are. You're just not talking about it, or you don't see it. It's there. People are aware. Like, you can see plenty of videos of the game completely breaking down, and no one should really buy this game. So thankfully, Sony is taking one for the team and allowing refunds on this game. They don't do this traditionally. Like, you can get refunds on the PSN, but it's really hard. You have to go through layers and layers of support chat. Of course, it would help if you're level 4 in PS stars, but that's going away. So I don't know how the priority chat service is really going to work anymore. But yeah, I just wanted to tell you that if you haven't bought MINDSEYE, it's a complete disaster. So you should probably stay away from it. And if you do have it and you find bugs that are just making it unplayable for you, Sony will give you a refund if you go through the PlayStation support chat system. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but this is not a game that you should pay full price for. If you're really dead set on playing MINDSEYE, I would say wait for it to be $20. I'm assuming that will happen very quickly because of how few copies this game is selling. Like, I've seen retailers taking it off their shelves. It's just crazy that they thought they could get away with releasing it in this state. It actually started out as like an NFT game where you were going to be able to interact with the blockchain, and then they stripped all that stuff out when NFTs went away, and what was left was a bare bones sort of open world style GTA clone, and it just doesn't look very good. So yeah, if you bought the game, you can get a refund from Sony, but hopefully you saw the reviews, you saw the gameplay footage, and didn't go anywhere near this game. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in this one. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.